Hi, thank you everyone for attending today's virtual Hill briefing on transition age youth, TAY, and tax credits. We're so glad that you're able to be here today, and we are additionally just thrilled to be joined today by Congressman Davis. He's co-hosting today's event, and in just a moment, I'll have the opportunity to introduce him as we have folks still trickling in, and he's going to start us off with some opening remarks. Okay, it looks like we've got a steady stream kind of slowing down a little bit. So I'll go ahead and get us started. Congressman Danny Davis has honorably and zealously represented the people of the 7th District of Illinois in Congress since 1997. He's presently a member on the Ways and Means Committee and chairman of the Worker and Family Support Subcommittee. The congressman also serves on the Oversight and Reform Committee and a number of congressional caucuses. While Congressman Davis is widely known for his commitment to maintaining our nation's civil and human rights, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to highlight his long-standing commitment to children, and in particular, his work on behalf of children and young adults who've experienced foster care. Every year since 2010, First Focus Campaign on Children identifies Congress members who've taken legislative action for children to promote their well-being. The campaign distinguishes between those Congress members who are defenders and those who have taken it to the next level and become champions for children. Congressman Davis has been a champion for children every year, 10 years in a row. He's supported legislation to expand Medicaid for older and former foster youth. During the pandemic, he's supported legislation to prevent youth from being kicked out of foster care. He's written legislation to prohibit child welfare providers from discriminating based on sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, or religion. He has introduced legislation to encourage employment opportunity for teens and young adults who've been in foster care, and he sponsored the Child Poverty Reduction Act this year. I could go on and on. Congressman Davis is a lifelong champion for children and youth, and he understands that every effort to eliminate poverty amongst our children and young people is a worthwhile investment into our country's prosperity and security. Congressman Davis, thank you for your enduring commitment to our children. And I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say I look forward to hearing from you today about tax credits and transitioning youth. Thanks for providing some remarks for us.
Well, thank you very much. It sounded to me like you might believe that I believe children are the future, and I really do. So let me begin by thanking First Focus for holding this very important briefing to help transition age foster youth learn about how to claim the thousands of dollars in tax benefits for which they could be eligible. Most foster youth do not realize that they could get thousands of dollars in tax refunds. You do not have to owe taxes or work to get some of these tax refunds. I and other policymakers have fought hard for these benefits. Now we need youth to file their tax returns in early February so they can get them. There are 5 main tax credits in 3 areas that I want to highlight. Tax credits for working youth, for youth in school, and 3 for parenting youth. Importantly, you can qualify for multiple tax credits. For working youth who are low income, the Earned Income Tax Credit gives refunds whether you work full-time, part-time, as an employee, as a contractor, or are paid in cash. For individual workers, that is, single workers or non-custodial parents, I worked with Senator Casey and foster youth to specifically allow foster youth as young 18 or foster youth who are full-time students to get the earned income tax credit. We did not want these youth left out. For parenting workers, there's no age limit. If you are a low-income worker and a parent, you likely qualify. This is a lot of money, and it is worth your time to file your taxes. It's about $1,500 for an individual worker, about $2,400 for a parent with one child, and about $3,800 for a parent with two children. For youth in school or job training, there are two credits. One, the American Opportunity Tax Credit, or the AOTC. Two, the Lifetime Learning Credit, or LLC. The AOTC gives up to $2,500 per student per year for tuition, fees, and course materials for up to 4 years. You have to attend school at least half-time, but you can get the AOTC even if you aren't working or even if you don't owe taxes. The Lifetime Learning Credit is up to $2,000 a year. It is a bit more flexible because you can get it if you're in a degree or non-degree program, but you can only get it if you owe taxes. Then the tax credits for parents. For parenting transition youth, there are two key tax credits. One, the Child Tax Credit, or CTC. Two, the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit. It's called the DCTC. The Child Tax Credit helps parents even if you're not working and even if you don't owe taxes. It is $3,000 per child, age 6 to 17, and $3,600 per child under 6. The Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit gives working parents up to $8,000 to help cover child care costs. I fought hard for this policy because it is a lot of money to help working parents. So right now, this substantive benefit is only good for 2021. So please use it so we can show policymakers how important it is. Couple more important points. You must file a tax return to get these benefits. So be ready to file when the tax season opens around February. You can file for free using the IRS Free File software or going to the free Vita sites. These sites can help you get all the credits for which you're eligible. For some credits, you don't have to have any income. And for some, you only need an ITIN, not an SSN. If you are denied a credit because your parent claimed you, or the IRS did not understand your eligibility, ask for help from your representative or senator. We will ask the Taxpayer Advocate Service to help you. And if at all possible, please set up an actual bank account for a direct deposit of your refund. It is the quickest and safest way to get money. In closing, I am extremely grateful for this conversation because transition age youth deserve to receive all the benefits to which they are entitled. I also have to give thanks to the foster youth who used their lived experience to help enact the foster youth specific provisions. They helped explain how certain ideas would help foster youth or create obstacles to them using the print. I know that filing taxes can be frustrating, but we are talking about thousands of dollars that we put into law to help youth like you. We want you to get every last dime, even every last penny. So thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this briefing and make certain that you get every dime that to which you are entitled. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your time, Representative Davis, as you've really helped articulate all of the different possibilities for some economic assistance and the benefits that young people are entitled to. So we appreciate your time today and hope that you'll be able to stay on and listen for a while today.
Yes, I will.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. We're going to transition now to a panel discussion with some of the experts I have on screen with me here. And you know, I'm realizing now that I've just been talking to people and not actually shared who I am. I'm Aubrey Edwards-Luce. I'm the Senior Director for Child Welfare and Juvenile Justice Policy at First Focus on Children. And I'm joined today by a couple of colleagues of mine from First Focus. We have Michelle Dallafour, who's our Senior Vice President for Budget and Tax at First Focus on Children, and Cara Bellardi, who is our Vice President for Family Economics, Housing and Homelessness at First Focus. And then we have a couple of our colleagues from other organizations, Jennifer Pokempner, who's the Policy Director at Youth Law Center, and the amazing Anna Johnson, who is Senior Project Manager at John Burton Advocates for Youth. Today we're going to have a conversation about what tax credits are available for transition age youth, who transition age youth are, what are some of the experiences they've been having economically and with regards to poverty and homelessness and employment during the pandemic, how Congress has tried to respond to some of those needs, and then what we can do to make sure that we build upon that momentum and secure some of these options and opportunities for the long haul. So let's get started. I just want to maybe do a little bit of level setting. So we're talking about TAY, and this is an acronym that we use for transition age youth. We can maybe go to that slide so folks can see who it is exactly we're talking about. We're talking about young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are making the transition to adulthood. And it's important that we speak specifically about this group of young people because it's an important critical development time, right? This is when young people are able to get support and interventions that really can have a lasting impact into their future. And we want to speak about policy recommendations and responses to this age group specifically, because they need and deserve targeted, tailored policy responses. And it's also important for us to understand that when we talk about transition age youth, it is a term of art that is oftentimes used to refer to youth who are within that age group and also have experienced foster care, juvenile justice, or homelessness. So kind of having set that stage, I'm going to invite Cara and Jennifer to talk to us a little bit more about what are some of the experiences that young people in this age group, transition age youth, have with regards to poverty and homelessness. And then maybe Jennifer, you can talk to us specifically about the experiences of foster youth who are in this age group as well. So Kara, can you kick us off? How are transition age youth doing?
Sure. Thanks, Aubrey. And first, I just, want to thank Congressman Davis again for his tireless leadership on behalf of children and youth, and for being such a leader around child poverty reduction. He has long led the Child Poverty Reduction Act, as you mentioned, which would codify a national target to end child poverty in the U.S. And we know this is really needed to build upon, the progress we've seen in the American Rescue Plan, and hopefully we'll continue to see. But so just really want to thank him and his staff for all of their work. So yeah, I'm just going to set some kind of broad and brief context on youth poverty and homelessness, that I think will just help provide some context. And I know then Jenny will kind of dig in more. So, I know it's not a surprise to anyone on this call that, unfortunately, historically, the U.S. has had a really stubbornly high rate of child poverty. We have historically had a much higher rate of child poverty than other industrialized countries. Children have been the poorest, people in our society, and that's because we have really traditionally underinvested in our children and youth. And we know that COVID has only exacerbated hardship for so many children and families who are disproportionately experiencing, hardship and poverty already, and now as a result of COVID, especially households of color. And that, hardship is really continuing. We're now about 20 months into this pandemic. However, COVID has also shown us that when we have the political will to act, we can make real progress and impact even in a global pandemic, right? So census data that recently came out showed us that, when taking into account assistance from some of the aid packages passed by Congress, that child poverty actually decreased in 2020. It's still high, but it decreased as a result. And we know that in 2021, due to assistance in the American Rescue Plan, that child poverty is being nearly cut in half. Now, a lot of that is due to the heavy lifting of the child tax credit, which we're going to hear more about. And to really, drive this point home, the Urban Institute, finds that it's likely that due to the American Rescue Plan, children will actually be the least poor age group in our nation, right? So there will actually be a flip in that dynamic. We know we have to make sure this assistance continues and increases, and it's not reaching everyone. And I know we're going to hear more about that. To hone in on youth and young adults, ages 16 to 24, on average, they have about, in the last year in 2020, about a 14% rate of poverty. This doesn't take into account the impact of assistance. And so that rate is lower than for young children, but, higher than for adults overall. Again, it's not taking, assistance into consideration, but we know that youth and young adults often have barriers to accessing assistance and may not even be eligible. So in the first two rounds of stimulus payments, we know that, youth and young adults sometimes were not able to access them if they were claimed as dependents, by others, for example. And then we know that youth who are disconnected from school or work have, much higher rates of poverty and hardship, which I know we're going to hear a little bit more about. In looking at child and youth homelessness, unfortunately, it's a similar dynamic, right, where rates were really high even before the pandemic. The U.S. Department of Education in the 2018-2019 school year, which is the most recent data we have, found that there is nearly 1.4 million, public school students experiencing homelessness, and 125,000 youth who are experiencing homelessness on their own, right, who are particularly vulnerable to victimization and predation. We know that that's an underestimation of the problem. Recent data from the CDC found that there was even higher rates of youth homelessness. And so we know that, schools are often doing the best they can, but are under-identifying the problem. And we also have data from Chapin Hall, the University of Chicago, that looks even beyond, right, school-age children, and finds, 4.2 million youth and young adults experiencing homelessness on their own at some point throughout the year. And that is, 1 in 30 youth, so, ages 13 to 17, and then 1 in 10 young adults, 18 to 25. So those numbers are right, pretty staggering. And again, youth, who are experiencing homelessness on their own are really particularly vulnerable. So, I just want to wrap up with saying that it's really critical for those children, youth experiencing homelessness to have assistance in accessing assistance, right, that they're eligible for, that we heard, and benefits, because, there's no kind of formal system to help them. They're often not connected to homeless services. It's really hard to access civil legal services. And so it's really critical, right, that that they are able to get all the help they can, as we heard from the congressman, in accessing, tax credits and more. So, but with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny to kind of dig in even further.
Great, thanks so much, Kara. Do you mind going to the next slide? Thanks. So just to add to what Kara shared, which I think sets a really great context, is just getting a sense of the numbers of youth and the types of challenges. I think many people have heard the term that Kara just mentioned, opportunity youth, which is youth between the ages of 16 and 24 who are not connected to school and work. And so that is part of this TAY population. There are many TAY youth who are connected to school and work, and we also want to address their needs too. But this is definitely a group we want to be thinking about, how to provide targeted supports to. Next slide. And again, as Kara mentioned in some of the numbers and data that she talked about, transition age youth have been particularly hard, those that are connected to the workforce during the pandemic. This slide gives you the details in terms of the percentages of unemployment and how they were hit hard during the pandemic, and how that relates to kind of their older counterparts. And also, it's not surprising that for younger workers, they were and are in industries that, again, were hard hit during the pandemic. So that also, I think, results in more financial insecurity, and again, a need for more targeted supports, programs, and tax credits for those young people. And again, as Kara mentioned, a lot of these young workers and workers who are new to the workforce didn't have access to a lot of the pandemic assistance. The expansion of EITC is so crucial and was in the American Rescue Plan, and that, I think, is such a promising and really positive approach to support young workers. Next slide. And as Aubrey mentioned, we really do, we're talking about today the whole spectrum of transition age youth, but we do want to acknowledge that there are subgroups within that transition age youth full group that really do deserve, again, special targeting and programming because of the unique barriers. And so we wanted to talk a little today in particular about youth who are involved with the foster care system, but also keep in mind youth involved with the juvenile justice system and homeless and housing insecure youth. And what these groups do have in common is some system involvement and also lack of family support, which Aubrey talked about in the beginning, this important phase, the transition to adulthood, such an important phase in development, and it relies so heavily on family support. And so if young people don't fully have that, we need to figure out how to provide that support, both in terms of social supports and financial support. And so that's one of the reasons we really want to think about these subgroups. So this slide gives you some of the stats again on the numbers. Right now, we do know that over 700,000 youth with experience in foster care between 18 and 26, that's the number we have, and that's the number that Annie Casey Foundation did the estimates based on when we looked at, who's eligible for that pandemic aid. But looking at kind of historically what the outcomes are and how youth aging out or leaving foster care, how they're doing, they really are experiencing a lot of challenges. And that second bullet is one of the most, I think, concerning factors, is that youth are aging out at really high numbers when they hit age 18 in the foster care system. Some of them can stay in the system, but still we're talking about youth leaving the child welfare system not connected to family supports. And that really, again, just does leave them difficult circumstances, both in terms of having support financially, but also having the help they need to be connected to the workforce and school. And then the slide also presents just some of the details in terms of the outcomes. And we wanted to highlight some of those outcomes related to economic security and employment. And then as you know, Kara mentioned, you know, everyone was hit hard by the pandemic, young workers in particular, but we really did see from multiple data sources that youth with experience in foster care, that they really were challenged, both in terms of the impact on work, the impact on school, and just financial insecurity. So wanted to share some of that data. Think of Us did a very large data sample. Anna's organization, John Burton's Advocates for Youth, also did a great research and data set if people want to take a look at that. Thanks,
Awesome.
Aubrey.
Yeah, thanks for presenting us with all of that background information. I want to move over to Michelle to tell us a little bit about, you know, we've kind of gotten a picture now of all of the challenges that we're facing transitioning to youth, you know, economically speaking, employment speaking. Can you tell us a little bit about how Congress has tried to use tax credits as a tool to support transitioning to youth?
Yeah, and I may be repeating a little bit what you've already heard, but I feel like in the tax space, that's not a bad thing because sometimes it's complicated. And quite frankly, I think it's been overlooked a little bit as a policy tool to help transition age youth. So I'm pleased to be part of the panel today, and I fully anticipate that after our discussion, we'll have additional follow-on conversations and actions to take to help elevate the needs of transition age youth, especially with the tireless leadership of champions like Representative Davis. And then I also wanted to point to President Biden and Vice President Harris's commitment to a comprehensive government approach to advancing equity for all and calling on its executive departments to redress inequities in their policies and programs that serves as barriers to equal opportunity. And I say that because A, it's a good thing, but a very good thing, but also because they, in the executive order that is related, they particularly point to the engagement of the Treasury Department and the IRS to be part of these conversations. So I think that's a really good thing, and you know, there is more work to do. I wanted to just talk a little bit of some of the COVID-related relief, and you heard a little bit of this, but as we do, there were 3 different economic impact payments that were authorized by Congress during the pandemic and the economic collapse, starting in the spring of 2020. And then we had a second payment at the end of 2020, and then the American Rescue Plan authorized a third round. And while you've heard some of this, just related to youth and young adults, you know, first of all, the first round of payments, we didn't even have total equity, right? Like young people received a lower payment, and some of the young adults were left out, as Kara already pointed out. 17-year-olds and students who maybe were dependents by parents couldn't, you know, get their own payment. And so we made some changes in the right direction in the third round, and those folks were included in the economic stimulus payments. But then in addition, they're just, you know, some of the hard to reach people who maybe didn't know, maybe weren't tax filers, or, you know, so they weren't in the system and didn't know what they needed to do to receive the payments. And so there was some lag, or unfortunately, young people were missed and didn't receive the payments. So my point of all that is, while we were glad those stimulus payments happened and so many tens of millions of people received the payments, there's more work to do there. The other, I wanted to talk about 3 of the tax credits that were authorized, improvements to the tax credits that were authorized under the recovery program. The earned income tax credit, which you heard a little bit about from Representative Davis, and particularly it expanded the eligibility age for the credit, and in particular dropping the age from 25 to 18 for former foster youth and youth experiencing homelessness, even if they are students. And you heard the Congressman mention that. So that is an important provision. It triples the credit. You heard him mention that. And we did some math, Aubrey, a while back, that we estimate it, between 380,000 and 500,000 former foster youth could benefit from this credit. So back to the Congressman's point, we need to make sure they are aware of this credit and that they file their taxes, even if they don't owe taxes, that they file their taxes in early February so they have access to the credit. In addition, we did some major improvements to the child tax credit. You heard a little bit about this. We increased the amount, we expanded the age, we made the credit available in advance payments. It's fully refundable, which means we're capturing, you know, about a third of children who have been left behind. So, and we know as well that the payments are being used for, you know, household necessities across the country. So it's working. So we need to continue to push for those improvements as well. And then finally, I always stumble over this one. So child and dependent care tax credit, CDCTC, we also expanded that credit, and you heard the Congressman talk about that. And, you know, just making it a larger credit available to more individuals, and particularly the low and moderate income households, by making the credit fully refundable. So that, you know, it's a huge investment. I did some quick math, and with the economic impact payments and the expansions of these tax credits, you know, we're looking at over $1 trillion of investments in fiscal year 2021 and 22. So it's game changing, but they're largely temporary, and we still have work to ensure people know that they have, make sure they have access and can benefit from the credits. So thanks for a little bit of time there.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Michelle. And Jenny, I was wondering if you could talk to us briefly too about another type of tax credit, the work opportunity tax credit, and ways in which that is being proposed to be expanded to help specifically transition age youth who've experienced foster care.
Okay,
Sure.
I thought, oh, Jenny's doing that. Okay, good.
Oh.
I thought you said Michelle.
No problem. Thanks, Aubrey. Yeah, the workforce opportunity tax credit is an existing tax credit on the federal level that gives credits to employers who hire individuals that fall into certain categories who face barriers to work. And there's about, I think, 10 categories, and so examples of some of those categories or workers would be veterans, individuals who receive SNAP or SSI, also young people for summer employment are one of the categories. And so it's a credit, again, as I said, it's been in place for many years, and I think has had a good deal of success. And there have been efforts, and you see two of these pieces, the first two pieces of legislation on the slide, proposed to include transition age youth with experience in foster care and a couple of other categories of transition age youth in the tax credit. And I think that, again, would be a great way to use, you know, taxes and incentivizing employers to reduce barriers for young people. And we'll hit the third piece of legislation when we talk about recommendations and pairing tax credits with other incentives to help young people get attached to the workforce.
Awesome, thanks so much for that. So I think now is the time for us to talk specifically with Anna. Anna, I know that you all have been doing some really cool things at John Burton Advocates for Youth to really find out and kind of experiment with how these tax credit changes can impact transition age youth who've experienced foster care. So can you tell us a little bit about how these changes can impact say you've experienced foster care and some of the lessons learned from your experience?
Absolutely. Thank you so much to First Focus for having us, and to Representative Danny Davis for being such a leader and creating these opportunities for our young people who are living in deep poverty, are being very heavily impacted by the pandemic, and do need this income to sustain and get through and start their careers and finish their education. So thank you so much. Next slide, please. So at John Byrne Advocates for Youth, just as Michelle said, we saw that pandemic relief was coming through the tax infrastructure, and that young people who are in or exiting foster care at age 18 and older are first-time filers. And as was mentioned by Jenny, 85% are aging out and are not connected to their family. And so we thought, well, we need to figure out a way to support young people in filing their taxes and to receive that intended income, all of these benefits intended for them. How do we know they're getting it? So we have a report on a pilot project that we did with Santa Clara County, and you can access that report. It's now in the handouts on the webinar panel. And this kind of goes into detail what we did, why we did it, and the results. So next slide, please. We had heard from our youth advocates their experiences filing taxes, our own personal issues filing taxes when we were young adults and didn't have that adult support, and all of those questions that come up when you can't just go to a parent or file with your family and have that support. There's a lot of questions. And so these are the barriers that we knew youth would be facing when trying to access their stimulus payments or trying to access these tax credits. So like we said, they lack formal support. And no one within the child welfare system is designed into law required to help them file their taxes. While we do have some laws around financial literacy and banking, those federal and state laws are right now silent on whose responsibility and role it is to help youth with this part of their financial literacy and this part of transitioning to adulthood. Youth, because they're in care, also move around a lot or have placement changes, or they might have a lot of different part-time work opportunities, and those documents that are required to file taxes might be missing, including some of the documents that case managers are supposed to assist youth in getting. So their bank accounts, their driver's license, just their W-2s, their 1098-Ts, all of this verbal jargon that first-time filers don't know necessarily what it means. Young people let us know that taxes feel complicated, confusing, or they're actually scared that the IRS would, that they would owe money, which is not the case, and that the IRS would issue a consequence if they did something wrong. So there's actually more fear than information right now being delivered to them through our outreach channels. And because they're low income, they're not earning enough to legally be required to file. So they see it as unnecessary. So they don't, if someone says to someone who's trying to survive a pandemic, trying to get reconnected to school, trying to maintain their housing, do this extra thing you don't actually have to do and that you don't know how to do, it's a barrier. Transition age youth were unaware of all of those credits that Representative Davis talked about and that Michelle highlighted as well, that they didn't know about them. They didn't know that thousands of dollars were being left on the table and how to access it. When people did get directed to a VITA site, there were actually a lot of closures in 2020 during the pandemic of free tax preparation services. In many areas of our state, there wasn't one within 50 miles, or there wasn't a public site, or there were sites, but there were no appointments available. So if they wanted free help, it wasn't accessible for all. And so there's a kind of a shortage or a desert there that we're trying to correct. And then finally, adult supporters of TAY, who are the caregivers, the college campus supporters, the case managers, they need accurate information, and taxes change year over year. So if they do not know those deadlines, those thresholds, all of these new laws, and social workers, this isn't part of their existing training. It's not necessarily something, unless states choose to direct information to them, it's not part of our current outreach. That is something to work on. So knowing all of these barriers, we set about on our pilot, which is the next slide. What we did in the simplest way possible is we worked with Santa Clara County and their youth hub at Bill Wilson Center, their provider of independent living program services, to set up a volunteer income tax assistance site right there at the youth center, a place that they were familiar with and that they knew those trusted adults and had the relationships already in place. Then we recruited and trained 12 volunteer tax preparers, 2 county staff, and 6 community-based provider staff to be tax volunteers and run the site itself. Santa Clara County drafted and ran their policies and protocols. They trained their staff, and they had their staff outreach and help youth get those documents that are necessary to file, get their Social Security cards or their ITIN numbers, and educate them through independent living program classes about these benefits. So they also knew exactly where to get that appointment. And they used youth-friendly outreach materials that were created with youth themselves. So it was something they could understand without the jargon. Next slide. The results were amazing. Santa Clara County and their partners did such a great job. In the very short time that we had to set up and run the site, they, with the help of United Way and with the IRS, they served 45 youth, and those 45 youth received over $135,000. That's an average return of $2,800 per youth during a pandemic. They needed this money. It was life-saving for them. It led for them to have their car repaired so they could maintain their employment, a down payment on their apartment for them and their daughter, right? This was their food for months. So they were thrilled to have it, and it paid off past due bills and helped them secure their work and their education. 100% of these young people had a positive increase in their income because they filed their taxes. 100%. Next slide, please. So exactly what that impact was, exactly like Representative Davis said, pilot participants, it was worth it to them to file their taxes. It boosted their income by 14% for single filers. And for young parents, those 3 tax credits that Representative Davis talked about and that Michelle highlighted, it was a 42% boost to their income, over $6,000 received. Pilot participants recovered $38,000 of those missing stimulus payments from 2020, which if they hadn't filed their taxes, they would not have received. And then pilot participants also had other benefits like state withholdings from those small or part-time jobs or their campus jobs they were working, and everything that was removed from their taxes and their pay stubs, they got that back. This amount I like because that's the kind of average cost of a paid preparer. And if they had gone to a paid site, they would have had that $400 taken out of their pockets, out of their refund. But instead, they had that as a net benefit from having this free service. Next slide, please. You can see a little bit more here, the 2020 breakdown of those credits that were mentioned and how they were benefiting youth. And what I'd like to point out here is that we're looking forward to 2021 because right now the federal credits were really only accessible to young parents last year. But with the changes mentioned for this upcoming season, we'll see more of our youth being able to access that $1,500 that Representative Davis mentioned. And so this will be a huge boost to their income filing when they do so this year. And what we do see from this table and results is that we are leaving some money on the table when we don't have formal adult support helping youth. So the child care tax credit, which was boosted to $4,000 for one child or $8,000 for more than one child. The young people need to know, keep your receipts, go get if you paid a babysitter, if you paid a child care provider, here's how you enter it. Here's what we need to help you enter that information when you come to your appointment. They didn't have that knowledge of keeping that documentation. Same thing with students. The tax timeline is in, January through April, but the semester started in August, and that's when they spend money on their books, and that's when they're paying their fees. And if they didn't keep their receipts, they're not maximizing that $2,500 education credit each year. they're getting, so when they have adult formal support and these reminders and they know about it, this is really a chance for them to maximize these credits that any parent would help their child in school gather those receipts and file correctly. And that is our role now for our youth, to make sure they're getting that same help. Thank you so much for letting me share this really positive news, and how these federal law changes have directly supported young people who are able to have their taxes filed.
Thank you so much, Anna. I mean, this is just amazing. And when we think about like the expansion of both the number of youth who are going to be able to access the credits in the future, and then if we were able to like gather this kind of data, nationwide, the impact that that having those supports could have for kids across the country is it's really exciting. So we'll keep talking a little bit more about our recommendations, but first I want to switch over to Jenny, because Jenny, you promised us a little bit of info about that last WOTC tax credit proposal, and I think this might be a good spot for us to talk about how that change could impact TAY youth.
Sure. The first two pieces of legislation on that on the slide we had a couple back, if you don't mind going back there, Tim. Two pieces of legislation were proposing to expand the tax credit to include transition age foster youth. Yeah, thank you so much. And a couple of other subpopulations in that transition in the transition age youth group. The third piece of legislation, Creating Pathways for Youth Employment Act, is, I think, a great addition to talk about, and we'll probably do some more sessions on this, Aubrey, about pairing tax credits that incentivize employers to work with young people and create opportunities that have real career ladders, but also this bill, Creating Pathways for Youth Employment, really provides financial assistance to employers to create subsidized employment programs targeting transition age youth. And what I think is also unique about this piece of legislation is it really did respond to some of the feedback that I think lawmakers got from young people and youth advocates, that we definitely want to help young people that aren't connected to school and work, but we also want to support young people who are connected to school and also need assistance with being part of the workforce and having some of those really great opportunities for work that are available through the work opportunity. I always get it wrong. Sorry, WIOA. That those programs really have been so beneficial to transition age youth, but that we do want to make sure that young people, both in school and out of school, have those opportunities.
That's right, and I think it's going to be really important too that employers have some of that funding to really help educate themselves and on how to engage with youth who are disconnected, and to provide a workspace that will help them also thrive, right, as they are learning these new skills and becoming valuable employees too. We are quickly running out of time, so I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to talk about our recommendations, and I'll go ahead and let folks know if you have any questions or questions are coming up for you, please feel free to drop them into the question box, and we will do our best to try to squeeze one in, but I will turn it over to Michelle to kind of help us think through what needs to be done to maximize the positive potential of these tax credit reforms.
Yeah, thanks, Aubrey. So I'll try to just run through my relatively short list here, but I think we have some good news, right? From the pilot, we can see that we have examples of what we know works, and so I go back to how I started earlier, which is let's make sure we're having conversations with the right people in the administration and give them the great feedback and ideas and what we know works. But we'd love to see the tax credits made permanent. The House legislation for the Build Back Better bill, that's a mouthful, does not do that. It has a 1-year extension of the child tax credit. However, it does include making the fully refundable provision permanent. So that's good to see. And it does include a 1-year extension for the earned income tax credit provisions we were talking about, including those for foster youth and youth experiencing homelessness. So we certainly want to make sure that the legislation that is still under negotiations includes those temporary extensions, and then continue to work to expand on that. The other thing I would point out is that the House bill has some additional funding for the IRS to both help in administering the child tax credit, but also helping to ensure enrollment for the advance payments. And I think there will be lessons learned there and things we can replicate when it comes to the earned income tax credit and the CDCTC this tax season. There's also just general increase for, pre-filing assistance and education services, for example, at the IRS. It's been woefully underfunded and understaffed, and so these are important resources for that agency. And then I would want to mention pushing for, sort of maximum funding for the volunteer income tax assistance program at the IRS. There are about 3,700 different VITA sites, and they prepared over 1 million tax returns in 2020 and helped thousands with claiming the ever so important economic impact payments. And then they also generated more than 1.7 billion in refunds outside of the stimulus payments to households generally earning less than 54,000 in annual income. So I think those sites and making sure they have the information that they need and can help service young adults who will now be applying for these new but temporary tax credits. So Anna, I don't know if there was something you wanted to embellish there from your pilot program, but that's my list for you all.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I would love to. The next slide is part of a recommendation from our report and what we're hoping we will see more from the IRS as well. So I don't know, Tim, if you can go to the next slide. And I think the next slide, I think Michelle already covered this one. Perfect, thank you. So with the funding for the IRS, the IRS already has a program, the tax counseling education program for the elderly. And, I would love to see that built upon specific for first-time filers for this population of transition age youth, where the IRS could create program and materials designed for young adults who are underutilizing several tax credits intended to benefit from them, mainly because they don't know about them and they don't know how to access free services that are out there for them. So establishing local VITA sites and partners who can disseminate youth-friendly tax outreach and lessons for young workers and transition age youth in foster care or exited from foster care or who are homeless. I think that would be such a smart use. It's exactly who we want this fund to go to, and it's exactly the service that is intended to serve them and that equity goal that was mentioned earlier. And we're hoping that each state can at least consider using some of that funding to dedicate at least one VITA site with expertise on transition age youth and know that specialized kind of care and approach that would help access these credits for those young people. So thank you so much for considering.
That's great. Jenny, is there any recommendation you'd like to add?
Sure. Just building on what Anna said, definitely love to see the VITA funds be increased and designated for transition age youth. Would like to also, recommend, the Chafee Act funds are really designated to help youth as they're transitioning to adulthood and developing financial capability and skills as part of that. But as Anna mentioned in her presentation, doesn't specifically talk either in Chafee or any part of our transition planning responsibility that doesn't identify helping with tax preparation and connecting with those services or providing them. And so I think both thinking about increasing those funds for that purposes and being more explicit about that obligation would be great. And the last two recommendations, just to add, as we all mentioned, doing these reforms through the tax code, both to impact young people and employers, is such an important piece of the puzzle, but also thinking about those reforms that can help support, again, connecting youth to the workforce and industries that really will provide a career path, and then also reforms to help young people with savings and asset development. So thinking about economic mobility accounts, child savings accounts, and really targeting those at transition age youth with system experience that may not have families that are providing that asset development. So I know we're going to have more conversations about that, and look forward to talking with the panel and others about that in the future.
Awesome. Well, I think we have come to the end of our formal presentation, and we have also kind of come out of time. There was so much to get through and so many important pieces that we were able to talk through, but I want to make sure that folks know about a couple of actions that they can take today. Ginny, would you be so kind, and Anna as well?
Sure. Anna, do you want to do the first bullet?
Yes, and I would love to put a link in the chat. We are actively recruiting new volunteers to help us out, expand our pilot project to serve additional counties in California and serve more foster youth with a free tax appointment. And the training is free. There's locations wherever you are across the country. So if you want to sign up, there is, you can just Google VITA volunteer, but I'll also put one if you want to help us with our pilot expansion and helping youth this year. Thank you.
Thanks. And then just, we really do urge everyone to encourage your senator, your representative to make the tax credits permanent. The EITC expansion is so important for transition age youth and their families, and the same thing with the child tax credit. It's helping young parents, but it's also helping the young people that we work with helping them with, being able to stay and have stability within their families. So really encourage you to do that advocacy so both of those important credits can become permanent.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm so sad to say we've run out of time today. If anybody has questions, maybe Tim, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. And I just want to take a moment to also, again, thank Representative Davis for being with us today, for continuing all of this advocacy. We know that you also have some bills with regards to the workforce opportunity tax credit as well, that we'll continue to be supporting and looking forward to seeing those get passed as well. And then also a special thank you to the Walter S. Johnson Foundation for their support to make today possible. And I think that is all that we have time for today. Thank you everyone for attending, and please feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And we look forward to connecting with you afterwards to provide you with resources as well as slides. Thank you.